Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about Joseph Smith's rocks that he used for translating the Book of Mormon. So growing up, I was always taught, like all of us were, that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon from golden plates that lay hidden deep in the mountainside that were buried by the angel Moroni, and that was what the artwork was all about. That's what the children's songs that we sang were all about. That was all the propaganda was about. Joseph Smith using physical, actual golden plates to make the translation of the Book of Mormon. So now the church is kind of veering in another direction with telling us that, like I said in previous videos, they're starting to use the word revelation more than translation. They're trying to softly put the idea to us that Joseph Smith didn't necessarily need the plates all the time, and he didn't necessarily use the plates. And we're finally seeing, I don't know if this is official church artwork or just like what has come up since, because now we know about the stones in the hat thing, and I've seen that image now. It's kind of maybe a bit more circulated of Joseph Smith like sitting on some stairs with looking into stones in a hat. And the church is admitting that yes, that's a lot of times what Joseph Smith used in the translation process was stones in a hat. So they say things like, yeah, it's always been there in history. You could have looked at it if you wanted to, but I have a big problem with that, because no, it has not been in the history. I mean, as a young kid especially, like there was no mention whatsoever of Joseph Smith using stones, let alone stones in a hat, to translate the Book of Mormon. And for the church to say that, you know, the information's always been there, it's not our fault you choose to be ignorant. It's such gaslighting. And it makes me angry, and it's not cool. And they are putting some of that information out now, but just like the Gospel Topics essays were kind of put out quietly with no, you know, there was no announcement in General Conference, there was no, you know, proactiveness as far as on the church's part to say, hey guys, we're trying to be more transparent, we put these essays out. I mean, now they're saying like, oh yeah, the essays have been out, we don't know what your problem is. I mean, like Elder Ballard's telling everyone like, you should know these essays like the back of your hand. Whereas when the church first put them out, I think maybe 2013 to 14, like they were slowly putting those essays out. I hadn't even heard of them until this past year, and today's we're in October 2019. I think it's the 27th today or something. So yeah, it's just gaslighting once again that the church does, and it's extremely frustrating. It makes for like this crazy making, you know, like as members we're constantly left wondering like, wait, am I remembering all this wrong? Like, did we collide with a parallel universe, which, you know, like somehow everyone else knew this but I didn't? But no, you're not crazy. You are not crazy. The church is gaslighting us. They are telling us that they told us these things. They did not tell us these things. These things were not public information, unless you consider public information like some, you know, strange, like off the beaten path documents that lay buried in the church history library. Like these were not. And the church is very much in control of the propaganda, and you know, like they hire artists. They like the songs that the primary kids sing, that's all very much controlled by the First Presidency, the Quorum of 12 Apostles. Like all that stuff has to get approved. So also for them to kind of turn around and stab the artists in the back, which they've also done, and say like, oh well, you know, they took their artistic liberty and made this seem like Joseph Smith used the golden plates to translate. Like, I don't know what Arnold Freeberg was thinking, but the church totally controlled that narrative. They are the ones that paid the money. You know, when you have a patron that is paying for artwork, they very much control like what they're ones that are saying like what they want, especially when it's directing a narrative like in a religion, what they want that artwork to portray. So don't try to tell me that the church had no idea like what the artist was going to come up with, and then they were like, oh wow, it's portraying golden plates, when we're not really sure that's the case. But yeah, we'll put those paintings up and let everyone think that. So yeah, the crazy making and the gaslighting are a real thing, and you, as a member of the church now, like if I'm in my 40s, I'm 41, and I think the experience of, like, my daughter, for example, at BYU, she's being taught that there was multiple accounts of the first vision, for example, and that you know, the rocks in the hat idea, like, that's kind of slowly being phased in and being taught to these kids. So her experience, like the younger generation's experience in the church, is very different than what someone my age was, our experience. And so back to the stones in the hat. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, because the church lied to us, or they very much withheld the information about this, how the translation process occurred, if you want to call it a translation. And two, because these are the same rocks that Joseph Smith used to con people out of money. And there is just no way that you can justify what he did, Joseph Smith did, before starting the Mormon Church, and try to say that his occupation as a stone looker was anything other than a pure con man scheme. So just to touch on that a little bit, so I think it was Josiah Stowell, it was his name maybe, his nephew ended up either suing Joseph Smith or like somehow taking him to court over this, because Joseph Smith had come to his uncle's property and told him where to dig to find buried treasure, and of course the treasure was never there, because these magic stones that Joseph used to find buried treasure, surprise, surprise, he never found any buried treasure with. And not surprisingly, yeah, sometimes people would get upset with him, because I don't know how people believed him. I think some people did take his word, like, oh, well, the treasure is down there, you just didn't dig deep enough, that's not my fault though. But, you know, like, he would charge them money to locate buried treasure, and then of course they never find the buried treasure, and then they come back to him and they're like, there's no buried treasure, and he's like, oh, well, you know, you just gotta dig deeper in the earth. Or this one, like, he actually told someone that the more that they dug, the treasure was actually moving, because that makes sense, right? Wow, it's just unbelievable how people can be conned like this. But at the same time, I mean, you know, there was that dude that sold the Eiffel Tower twice, Victor Lustig. There's been some pretty incredible cons that people have fallen for, and it doesn't mean that people are stupid. It just means that con men are very good at what they do, and they're very good at finding people's weakness or vulnerability or place of attachment, like the thing that they're really attached to, whether it's a financial or religious thing, and working that and using it against that person to con them out of whether it's money or sex or whatever. So it doesn't mean people are stupid. It means that, I mean, yeah, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that has to happen. But I mean, I was in the Mormon Church for 40 years, and I bought it lock, stock, and barrel. So, and I don't consider myself a stupid person. I mean, I know I'm not always the most intelligent, but I know what it feels like to be conned, is what I'm saying, because I feel like that's what I was as a Mormon. I was conned into believing things that were not true. And so I have a lot of empathy for people, whether it's in a religion or a financial scheme or whatever, that have been conned, because it happens, and there's some brilliant people that are very good at what they do as con men. So yeah, I mentioned in a previous video how, like, Elder Corbridge talked about how that's the swamp of details from 200 years ago, and we don't need to go into that. All that matters is that Joseph Smith was a prophet. You have a testimony of that and a testimony of God, but it does matter. It does matter how Joseph Smith got his authority. It does matter how Joseph Smith behaved himself in his personal life. And we're not talking about small, little minor things. Like, he got drunk one night as a teenager. No, we're talking about some major stuff. He was arrested when he was 20 years old. I mean, he was arrested multiple times, and you don't like accidentally get arrested multiple times on false charges. I mean, when there's a pattern of behavior and there's consistent accusations, like, you got to think, okay, well, maybe there's something to this. So, you know, Joseph Smith was conning people out of money, and for people to say, like, or like Elder Christofferson said in his talk about leave poor brother Joseph alone. These were things that were said 200 years ago. It's problematic, because if our whole foundation of the gospel rests on those four things of, you know, Joseph Smith's a prophet, the Book of Mormon, the Restoration, the priesthood, or whatever, those foundations can be dismissed and can be like broken down block by block, then yeah, those things do matter, and they are quite significant. So back to the stones that Joseph Smith used, don't you think that if you had magic stones that could tell you where to find buried treasure, that just go find the treasure yourself instead of telling people that they could pay you money to locate the treasure and then they could go find the treasure? I mean, just like from a logical point of view, it just seems like Joseph Smith would have stood to make a lot more money if he truly believed there was buried treasure there, to find the treasure himself, than to charge people some like petty amount or some, you know, petty amount to locate the treasure. So right there, it's like Joseph Smith is admitting that what he's doing is a con. And that should have been people's first clue. Like, oh, someone's charging me money to show me where buried treasure is on my property. You know, instead they could just find the treasure themselves and, you know, pay me to dig on my property. But it's basically saying, like, I don't know where the treasure is, but, or, you know, even if there is one, but I'm gonna charge you money so that you'll pay me, and then if you're gullible enough, you'll believe me and dig, and then I can tell you, you just didn't dig deep enough. So, yeah, unfortunately, Joseph Smith was killed before the law could take its course, and people in Nauvoo took the law into their own hands and killed him. But if he were left to live, and if he had to stand trial for the things that he was accused of, I don't think the Mormon Church would have taken hold like it did, because when you have a martyr on your hands, all of a sudden, I mean, like, I was always taught growing up that he died as a martyr. I mean, that's what the songs are, that's what the propaganda teaches, that Joseph Smith died a martyr, that he was persecuted for religious reasons, and come to find out, actually, he was persecuted a lot because of, you know, he's taking, I mean, the people around him in the town and even members of the church itself felt like he was really living an immoral life. Like, the whole polygamy thing, he didn't even come out with the revelation on polygamy until well after he had multiple wives, had multiple relationships, whether it was like the Fanny Elder, whether you want to say that was an affair, or it definitely wasn't a marriage. Or, you know, you can also say, like, oh, well, he wasn't perfect, and okay, great. But one, I would expect the prophet of the Lord's church to be like a little bit above the bar. But also, I mean, several prophets since then have told us, like, the prophet can never lead us astray. So that right there invalidates Joseph Smith. But so they were, the people were angry because of what he was doing morally or immorally. And also, like, the people close to him were that if he was taking their daughters or even their wives, I mean, he was taking men's wives and sending them on missions, or sending them on missions and then taking their wives. So there was that part of it. There was the banking fraud. I mean, that's a whole nother one we could talk about. He scammed people out of a whole bunch of money with that. I mean, people lost life savings, and also the Book of Abraham we talked a little bit about, so he had bought those scrolls and mummies for, I think it's $68,000 or something in today's dollars. And one of my listeners commented that someone had to sell their farm for that, and then the poor guy, you know, like, he's left with nothing, and he believed in Joseph, and then they tried to sell the artifacts after to try to recoup some of that money. And as far as I know, like, either they sold it at quite a great loss, or they didn't sell them. I don't know what happened with those. But this poor guy, you know, he was kind of a byproduct of this scam, or Joseph just, you know, not being inspired and saying that he was inspired, and that this was Abraham's journal when it was just like some funerary text. So people, all these things start happening, and people are angry, rightfully so, because they're giving money to, whether it's trying to pay off all the times Joseph's arrested to pay for his bonds, or he's having people invest in this, you know, Kirkland Safety Society, this anti-baking bank that turns out to be a total bust, and a bunch of people lose their money. Or obviously the jealousy factor of him taking these women into these relationships, and basically using his religious position to justify that. And then there's the Nauvoo printing press, the expositor, and it gets one newspaper printing out before Joseph orders the Nauvoo Legion, which I think was like 5,000 men, or somebody can maybe verify that. It was a couple of thousand people, because Joseph Smith was the mayor of Nauvoo. And so he gets the Nauvoo Legion to basically go in and destroy this printing press, which is practically brand new. It had only printed one issue. And they throw it out on the street, completely destroy it. They ransack the printing press shop. And, you know, so he's destroying freedom of speech. And by the way, nothing in that Nauvoo expositor was untrue. None of it was like slander in the sense that stuff that they made up about Joseph Smith. It was true stuff. And he denied polygamy right up until the end. So we know Joseph was lying about that. He had that speech where he said something about, you know, I've been accused of having multiple wives when I can only find one. And some of his multiple wives were actually sitting in the audience of that speech. So I wonder what they were thinking on that one. So it's all quite problematic. And also, I mean, just the narrative and the way the church has taught us that Joseph Smith was a martyr, when actually the people that were trying to bring him to justice had extremely valid, legitimate reasons for wanting to bring him to justice. It's very angering that the church taught us that this leader of ours that we were taught to praise and worship, and, well, not worship in the sense of like deity, but, you know, like they have the song Praise to the Man. That leader was one that completely was deceptive and broke the law and was arrested several times, and cheated people out of money and women and all kinds of things. So that's frustrating. I know I heard someone compare it to, like, if Bernie Madoff started a church, like, we'd all be like, oh yeah, right, we're not going to follow him. We know Bernie Madoff's history. So true. I mean, like, today, you think of like the crooks and conmen of today, and who's going to trust someone like that to start a new religion? I mean, we're not going to trust them. But because Joseph Smith had the benefit, if you will, of dying young as a martyr and being, you know, painted as a martyr, all of that kind of gets erased, and so much of the history behind why he was actually being sent to jail or on trial, that just all gets repainted or whitewashed as it was religious persecution, when it wasn't. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the rocks Joseph Smith used to translate the Book of Mormon and other things. So there you go. Like and subscribe to my videos, and I hope you find them sort of entertaining and or helpful, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.